Welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. It is Sunday night, and that means our Q&A here on ThinnkSpot. And thanks for everybody tuning in to our Q&A. I got an exciting day today. We've got a new guest, somebody who we haven't had on the show before, and hopefully we're going to disagree. Hopefully the reason we came to ThinnkSpot was to have conversations with people who might not disagree with us. To have conversations on how we move the country forward. Again, back to our tagline, how we get things done. It's one thing to be mired in arguing and pointing fingers and all that, but how do we actually get stuff done? But before we get to all that, a little not surprised, a little sad about what happened in Bessemer, but not surprised. What it did for me, the loss at Amazon, solidified the fact that we need comprehensive labor law reform in this country. And I've talked to numerous people who've said, man, that the length of that campaign, all of the dirty tricks, all of the stuff that the employers have been getting away with for decades were right on display. And again, for me, it comes back to, this is why unions spend so much money on politics, because our laws are so badly broken and stacked against them. And we're going to be talking about that, obviously, for the coming weeks, because the PRO Act is still front and center. As I said, I wanted it in the infrastructure bill. Joe Biden listened. It's there. It's just if we can get it through. But for our Q&A tonight, and again, thank you everyone for tuning in. I've got a special guest, Erich. He is a ThinnkSpot contributor right here on this platform. He's also the editor at Marion West. He's a contributor on numerous publications, the Philadelphia Inquirer, Hartford Courant, the News and Observer, and the Orlando Sentinel, and of course, The Hill. Erich, thanks for taking time for us.
Yeah, Rick, I'm excited to be here. Happy to talk to another person with some Pennsylvania roots, and I think we'll have some great discussions. And I would echo what you said regarding ThinnkSpot. I think it's a very good place to have this sort of back and forth that I know we're going to have. And thanks for inviting me.
No, I appreciate it. And for folks who might not know, I mean, you're a big deal here on ThinnkSpot. But for folks who might not know, how long you been doing this ThinnkSpot gig?
Well, I think I've been with ThinnkSpot over a year and change now, so probably about February of last year. And I've enjoyed it a lot, and a lot of great discussions, including one that I think was particularly good a couple weeks ago with Stephen Blackwood about higher education and some of the trends there. And I think per what we were talking about the other day, Rick, I think maybe there's some interest in some of the cultural issues going on in some of the higher education and how that's kind of flowing out to other parts of the society.
Yeah, we've got a lot to get to, but I want to talk a little bit about what happened in Alabama, because it was an overwhelming loss. It was, to be honest, it was right about where I thought it was going to be, given all of the things that didn't get reported on. For instance, when the union went, the RWDSU, when they first got cards, they actually thought there were 1,500 workers there. Amazon got over 5,800 employees. So right from the beginning, it was stacked against them because of, right from the start, how it was all laid out. So the outcome was not surprising. But for me,
so you weren't surprised by this, Rick?
No, not at all. Because of that first. Right out of the gate, you were expecting an election of 1,500 people, and now they've been able to throw 5,800 into this. You collected cards, to win a 1,500 person election. From the beginning, you're starting from the gate. Because in organizing that I've done in the past, you don't go to an election unless you have 70 to 80% of the cards signed. Because you're going to have people who are going to back off because of all of the stuff that happens, all of the captive audience meetings, all of the harassment, the propaganda in the bathroom stall, the calls. The Amazon went as far as having someone with a sandwich board walking around the warehouse saying how bad unions are. But Amazon spent a lot of money and left no rock unturned in attacking the workers' ability to form the union, and we got what I expected.
So there's like a Hastert rule of sorts for union voting, where you need kind of X number before you're even ready to bring it to the floor, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, it's just your common sense. I mean, you're going to get some drop off as people begin to be intimidated because, look, put it this way. If you're sitting in a room, you need the job, you got a wife and kids at home, you got a mortgage, you got a car payment, you got all this stuff, and you've got an employer saying, well, we might have to move. And yeah, it may not be a great job, but we might have to, and we might have to lay some of you off, and we may have to do all of this stuff. These veiled threats that they do, it gets people going, hey, I can't, it's a crappy job, it doesn't pay well, but I need it. And it gets people thinking in that direction, and you get the natural bleed off from that.
And as we've talked about before, Amazon has obviously been under scrutiny and such, and been in the hot seat, so to speak, over various reports about the conditions at some of their warehouses, especially in your home state of Pennsylvania. And I've been hearing about this for a few years now, about people talking about some of the situations in these warehouses.
No, they're deplorable conditions. I mean, they're basically what we used to think of as sweatshops. I talked to somebody who said that they wear a wristband. And if they're not picking up a box every so many seconds, it's beeping at you going, hey, why aren't you picking up a box? If you go to the bathroom too long, they know. They micromanage every step, every second of the day. And, you're basically a human robot. And we could argue, well, you took the job, you knew what this was. And, the reality is when all employers are moving in this direction, we got problems, Erich.
Well, yeah, I think that's a key point, is that, I kind of look at the current economic system we have, and I don't really see it as I don't really see it as fully capitalist. I see it as an oligopoly, where you have, a number of corporations kind of often acting in somewhat coordinated or similar ways. And it's not as though, it's not like, what they always say, go somewhere else. A lot of the corporations, a lot of them are pursuing a lot of the same sort of practices, and it's not, especially as some of these places gobble up an increasing share of the market, such as Amazon. These are, enormously powerful corporations, and they're not. It's not like you can as easily go to the mom and pop store next door that's selling books
that don't exist anymore. You're right, but here, one of the things I've found surprising here on ThinnkSpot is the number of people, because I thought this was a center right to right leaning platform. I've been surprised at how many people, center right to right, are supporters of labor unions and are supporters of people having the right to collectively bargain. And this is one of those areas that I think there's a chance to come together on, that we have an opportunity to stand up against these big corporations.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I don't mean to be glib or whatever. I've spent about a year in some on ThinnkSpot, and I'm still not 100% sure what the exact political breakdown of it is, because I know in the media it's been covered as, this ultra conservative place, and that hasn't really been my experience fully. It seems fairly heterodox. There seem to be a number of different perspectives playing around. But to answer your question, I think there is certainly a constituency, right of center, and I would actually say, with some of the arguably some of the realignments happening among the two parties, I would actually say that the Republican Party at present is the home where I think you're going to see a lot of people, especially kind of some of these younger guns, whether that's Senator Hawley in particular and others, who are extremely concerned about the influence of these corporations and the power they wield. Obviously, big tech was one place that this was very extensively covered, and somewhere that they've kind of targeted a lot of their anger. And it's interesting because we see actually a lot more kind of corporate business money flowing to Democrats, particularly in the 2020 election cycle. And I think we're starting to see a situation where a lot of the assumptions that have been built in about what the two parties' kind of constituencies are, I think not only are poised to change, but are already in the process of changing. And some of the loudest voices I hear talking about particularly antitrust issues are on the Republican side of the aisle.
Yeah, but do you think that has most to do with the fact that they feel persecuted, the fact that they believe that they're being silenced? And I hear the same kind of talk from people on the left, that Google and Facebook and the others are censoring their speech. I see that Holly and the rest of them coming out of this victim point of view, that they're being silenced, much like they were claiming the IRS was doing to them, even though that wasn't actually factual.
Well, I would say, and I was going to say that, I was going to allude to that, is that initially a lot of the concerns about big tech explicitly came from concerns that they were being censored, which they were. Let's make no doubt. There is active censorship of left and right groups on social media, and that is beyond any doubt. But now, if you look at the DOJ's antitrust suit against Google, Bill Barr in the October 2020 statement makes very clear this is a separate issue than the 230 situation. He's saying Google controls 88% of the world's search traffic. And even if you wanted to compete with them, a search engine is about having access to lots and lots of people's queries by which to make informed results. And it's just not possible to do so. And, it was very clear in that DOJ filing that this is a very separate issue than the censorship thing. And I think that they're related, right? Because if Google didn't control 88% of the search traffic and only controlled, 20% of it, and Google censored you, it wouldn't be as big of a deal, right?
Right.
And that's what some of the senators were quizzing the CEOs of various tech companies, especially Facebook. And he gave the example of, with Senator Graham, he gave the example of, if I don't like my Chevy, I can go buy a Ford. If I don't like Facebook, where do you go? And somebody might say, well, you can go to Instagram. Oh, Instagram's owned by Facebook. You can go message on WhatsApp as opposed to Facebook Messenger. Oh, WhatsApp's owned by Facebook. So I think they're both legitimate concerns, and they're interrelated in a way, because, as I said, if they only controlled 20% of the search traffic as opposed to 88%, and they got rid of you, it wouldn't be as big a deal.
No, I'm with you. And this is where I'm hoping you're right. I'm hoping the right is coming around to the fact that monopolies are bad, because it's a place I've been in for a very long time and been screaming about corporate control of our media for decades now. I mean, this isn't new.
But, some of these concerns arguably came about as a result of, the Clinton administration with the 1996 Telecommunications Act with media. And then when a couple media companies can go gobble up all of the stuff, and now we see something like Alden Global Capital coming around, a hedge fund that's buying up places like the Denver Post, because they realize that even if the publication is basically worthless and they can maybe push through clickbait, pretty quickly and make a couple of years out of it, but the underlying real estate assets that the newspaper owns can be worth more than the sticker price of the publication. It's actually the same calculation Rupert Murdoch made in the 80s when he was trying to enter the American market and bought the Boston Herald, and he paid less for it than would just be the underlying real estate that the newspaper owned. And we see a couple of media companies gobbling up a lot of the media companies.
So before we move on, this is an interesting thing, because there are a number of platforms trying to compete for media space. Google, as you said, controls so much of it. How do you regulate that? How do you break that up? Because the argument is, well, Google's a thing. I Googled it. It's now a verb. It is part of our society. How do you undo what's already been done?
Well, this is where you get into, we talk about, you want to have solutions, right? You come to ThinnkSpot and you want to talk about solutions, but I'm hesitant to put forward the exact, I'm hesitant to endorse one particular solution at the moment. It's a difficult issue, and it's the same place, with even Section 230 reform on the Google Facebook situation. And you got to be careful that, I come from a school of thought that sometimes the remedies are worse than the underlying problem in some cases. And that's an argument a lot of people have made about Section 230. And a lot of ThinnkSpot contributors will probably be familiar with the back and forth on Quillette about that, with the editorial and Alan Farrington's response to the editorial. And, it is an immediate, so Section 230 obviously is a different issue a little bit than the monopoly issue. But it's not clear. So some people are arguing they should function kind of like public utilities, right? And that's something that Justice Thomas alluded to recently in his dissenting opinion. And I don't know the exact solution, but it does seem like one needs to be found, because these are a couple companies, Bell Telephone, Standard Oil size sort of operations that are completely and utterly. So you mentioned media companies. Facebook and Google, between the two of them, control something like 80% of the online ad revenue, and leaving the rest of us to fight over 20% of scraps.
Yep.
And then Google will roll out something like the Google News Initiative. And as we were talking about the other day, they'll say, okay, we're going to spend $10 million this year on giving it to publications. And that's like, the mafia, you got to thank them for not beating you up or whatever. And it's not a system that it seems to be working in any way.
Or for only beating you up.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what they're doing. Now, like on social media, I've often said, I believe everyone should have to be verified. I believe that everyone's name should be out front and you should be held accountable for the things that you write, the things that you publish. There shouldn't be this idea that I can literally say anything without consequences. If we're standing here looking at each other face to face, you're not going to say certain things. You're just not. We're not going to be as disrespectful to each other's face, I think, as we would be if we think we have some anonymity.
No, that's 100% true. I would just say, what happens if you're in situations like you're an Edward Snowden type person, or you're an employee at the Department of Education, and you're seeing things that are problematic, and journalists aren't quick to get your case, and you want to get that stuff out there anonymously. And social media, the internet has been historically conceived of as kind of last frontier of free speech, and you can kind of get ideas out. And often, in the business I'm in the journalistic business, sometimes you need anonymous sources are a thing that you need. And, not every publication is going to take every story. So sometimes things like social media can be the way to get things out there. And sometimes there is a role for kind of anonymity.
Yeah, I keep coming back to the fact that so many people feel that they can say whatever they want and they believe no one can find them, I think has really contributed to the negative discourse. And I understand your point.
That's true.
We've done it in the past. We've had pathways in the past. It just seems like there's got to be a way to calm this down a little bit.
Well, ThinnkSpot, for instance, I'll plug for our hosts. So they've tried to deal with this issue a little bit, where there's a certain amount of character limits to say certain things. Then if there's X amount of downvotes to a comment, so if somebody says something just kind of outrageous or profane, it gets downvoted to the point where it's hidden. And Reddit kind of does something similar. So, I don't know. I think there may be ways to kind of mitigate that somewhat, but there's no doubt that there's a lot of harmful meanness online. I would just kind of read it more as a comment on human nature than anything else.
No, see, I'm not talking about censoring anybody's speech. I'm saying you said it, you're responsible for it, you own it. There's none of this, I was able to get away with it being said without it actually being me. Everything I say, everything that comes out of my mouth, everything that comes off my fingers, I mean, and I say, and I stand by. And I think if we were that society, I think we'd have, maybe I'm wrong.
Well, yeah. So, for example, even just speaking at the magazine at MW, we really, for that reason of what you're basically saying, we really avoid articles written under pseudonyms and such, because, people want to have accountability for what they say. But there are situations where we do permit them on a rare basis. We had one the other day, was an article by a Canadian engineering professor who was calling out certain actions going on in his university, and he would definitely be kind of, I don't know if they could outright fire him. I don't know if he had tenure, but he would not be in a good place professionally if it became known that he was that person.
See, and that's what's wrong with our society, because look, I'm of the mindset that I want more speech, not less. I want debate. I don't want people just shouting at each other. But there's got to be a way where you can have these discussions without it being the end of your existence. And
right,
just a thought.
Right. So this is why I guess a lot of people, we talk about places of agreement of people who, are maybe left of center, right of center, but anyone who's in any sense of the word a small L liberal would be very concerned about the illiberal trends we're seeing from a lot of political factions in the United States that mostly now are aligned with the Democratic Party, where they say, the answer is to shut people down. You said that thing, you need to be, you can't work here anymore. I tell you, on a regular basis, I would say in the past couple of weeks, multiple times per week, I get emails from writers who written pieces years ago saying, I believe this is impacting my ability to find a job and such. And we certainly are not living in a small L liberal spirit of the times at the moment. Maybe that'll pass. Maybe 2 years from now, it'll be better. I don't know. But at the moment, it is not. It is very hostile to free speech.
Yeah, I'm of the mindset that we can have a past, we can grow, we can learn from it, and we can move forward, as opposed to some of the things that have been happening. I want to
Rick, you're going to get canceled soon for saying that.
Well, maybe, and I'm okay with that. I've said a lot of things. If you can't have an honest discussion and still hold to your core principles, I don't know what is. So anyway, I want to get to the question that someone asked. I need to click on the little button to say that yes, we're talking about it. So the question is, while the infrastructure bill is the right way to spend money, have we started operating on the assumption that the national debt no longer matters and we can spend as much money as we want? He says, I am afraid that the economic consequences could mean a much harder life for later generations. What are your thoughts on the national debt? I'll let you go first.
Okay, sure.
Or would you rather me
Right.
go first?
No, I'm happy to. I've just been doing a little bit of talking, so I want to make sure you're getting enough in if you want to take a crack.
No, you're here.
Okay. Well, I would say a couple things. First off, yeah, the national debt is an issue, right? And that's why a lot of conservative folks some of them were a little worried about then candidate Trump and then President Trump, because obviously he did a lot of spending and the national debt grew a lot under his administration. And historically, and some people may remember this, I did a newspaper column at the News and Observer a couple of years ago. I was talking about the advantages of divided government. I'm a fan of divided government. It's something I like. And at the time, North Carolina had, and still does, a divided government. And historically, divided governments are pretty good for curtailing debt, because Republicans often, they like to get in office and they like to lower taxes, but they also like to spend. And the Democrats usually like to spend, and maybe they want to try to raise taxes, maybe not. I don't know. It depends. But, the national debt grew a lot in the early 2000s under unified Republican control. So the national debt is often a talking point used by people kind of out of power. And our writer, Eddie Ferreras, talked about this in a column last Monday about the national debt. It's often a talking point by people in the minority at the time. But yes, I am very concerned about the national debt. What are we approaching? 29 trillion. And at some point, I'm of the mind, I know there are a couple new fangled economists who would say, actually, debt doesn't matter anymore. But I'm of the mind that it doesn't matter until it does. So everything kind of like kind of any sort of financial panic, the markets run on confidence, and just like a debt market runs on confidence, a lending market. So one day, and the day before, it won't have mattered. On the Tuesday, everything's fine. And then that Wednesday, something triggers it. Maybe a ratings agency downgrades the U.S. debt, just like they've done to other countries' debt. And people all of a sudden are going to say, man, I'm not that confident that this money's ever coming back. And then it'll be a problem all of a sudden, and a really big problem in a really, really big way. So the person asking the question alluded to the ethical considerations. Yeah, there's some ethical considerations, right? One of them is kind of, if it's not going to be paid back by the people now, a future generation's got to pay it. But the issue is, as I was alluding to with the Republicans who want to lower taxes and not cut spending, it's not really a political winner to try to do something about the debt, because everything is pretty painful to try to do something about it. So the incentive is really to kick the can down the road. And, when you think briefly about term limits here, one good thing, I guess, about not having term limits is maybe the people are there a pretty long time, and therefore they want to kind of rectify things over longer periods of time, as opposed to kind of just let's get in and out. Or you could argue conversely that if you're going to get in and out and not worried about your political career, then losing re-election isn't as big a deal, and maybe you want to do something about it. I remember in 2014, when the Republicans got the Senate, Mitch McConnell did an interview, and he was talking about how divided government's a time to kind of work together and do things that kind of equally hurt both parties. And maybe this would be an opportunity to try to do something about the debt. I don't know. But yeah, I absolutely think the debt is a problem. I would just, it's something that has got to be. So the last thing I'll say before I turn over to you, Rick, I was a little heartened that in the Biden infrastructure proposals, at least there was a talk about raising some taxes, because I think people have to understand that you just can't endlessly spend money without there being some sort of pain, right? So at least finally they said, okay, we're going to have to raise taxes. And then everyone got to be reminded, oh yeah, you just can't print money till the end of time. So there actually is some sort of consequence to, endlessly spending.
No, I'm with you on. I was glad to see Biden did that. Of course, then Joe Manchin and a couple of Democrats came out and said, no, 28% is far too high. We're going to go down to 25%, which obviously won't bring in as much money on corporate taxes. But, to me, that's one of the great things Republicans have been able to do over the years. Go back to the Eisenhower years. The corporate tax rate was like 56%. They've whittled it down all the way to 21% now, and now we're debating on going from 35 down to 21 to maybe back to 25. It's brilliant how the long game the Republicans have played on tearing that corporate tax rate down has really worked for them. I mean, they've done a great job. I give them credit. The problem is it's continued to grow our national debt, because you're right, we're not going to cut spending, especially in defense. You can't talk about cutting defense spending, or you're going to be weak. You're going to be with the terrorists, and that's bad. I personally am a tax and spend liberal. I believe we need roads, we need bridges. You got to raise taxes to pay for it. Just like in my household, because we love to talk about kitchen table economics. When the roof needs to get fixed, we figure out how to fix it. We borrow money, we work a couple extra hours, but the roof gets fixed and we have to pay it back. I feel the same way about our debt. Now, the difference is that, someday I'm going to die, and I know that my lifespan is very limited. Our government can run a much longer debt, and that's why I'm not so concerned about our national debt in this moment of crisis. We're at about, I think the number I saw was 110% of GDP was the number they were throwing around. That's very doable in virtually any household to have a debt to GDP ratio of 110%. Now, the goal, back during like they did during the Clinton years, and I was not a Clinton fan, when things started to get better, you start paying that back. We just haven't done that in a while. We've borrowed, we've spent on good things, we've spent on bad things, but we didn't, in the good times, start to pay things back. So I'm not so upset about the national debt at this moment. When the economy gets heated up and when things are really, really going well, if we're still cutting taxes, if we're still not paying down our debt, then I have a problem.
Well, Rick, yeah, I'm glad you mentioned defense spending, because obviously it's very, very significant, and some of the new proposals coming out for the first year under Biden are estimated to be larger than the year under Trump. And it's amazing. One of the things that most amazes me when I look at that is the degree to which those votes are so overwhelmingly bipartisan. And I don't agree with people like Glenn Greenwald when he says, actually, on most things that matter, the Republicans and Democrats are basically the same. But he is right on national defense. And I think a lot of people are surprised to see, so-called liberal icons, whether that's Liz Warren, whether that's Cory Booker, who are, voting to send Trump's Pentagon more than the White House even asked for. They're sending, last maybe 763 billion, 750 billion, somewhere in that range, fluctuating year in and year out, and just amazing expenditures on debt. And, people like me, really look at, I did a column on Nikki Haley a couple of years ago when I was talking about, she did this softball interview with Norah O'Donnell on CBS this Sunday morning. And it was about a lot of this sort of identity politics stuff. What was it like to be growing up as an Indian immigrant in South Carolina? About her father wore a turban. And I remember in the column I said, if this interview had consisted of rigorous journalism, it would have been, or the question I would have asked is, how do you kind of square the fact that you were UN ambassador, have presidential ambitions, and you're currently on the board of Boeing? And why is the story about Lloyd Austin? Why is the story that he is black as opposed to the story of that he was just on the board of one of the defense contractors? And these are major, major issues, and they're nothing new. People have been sounding the alarm about this for decades, but you have a revolving door. You have Jim Mattis, who's on the board at Raytheon, and it's the same people and the same sort of things. The defense spending is very, very significant, and then I look at that and I see. One of the things that really concerned me recently, and I talked about this, and some people on ThinnkSpot will, is kind of it's obviously a separate issue, but some of kind of the new policies that are being rolled out at Department of Defense that seem kind of not gelling with all of this spending in the service of ideally having this strong military. And it seems as though some of the policies that are now being rolled out are not exactly supporting, what you would think would be the goal of increased spending, which is to, stand up to very, very real global threats. I'm not a dove. It just seems as though some of this spending is not what it's presented to be.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. My problem has always been we just seem to spend so much money on these contractors and on military, and you're not allowed to talk about military spending because then you're un-American and you don't love the troops, and which is ludicrous, but it's how you're painted, and it's the reason that Warren and others don't balk too much. There'll be a little squawking around the edges, but it's the reason you don't see that united front against spending. And Biden's budget, $716 billion, I think the number was for defense, which is just enormous.
Sure. And even, but as you said, there's a lot of pressure. So even when you have hardcore debt hawks like Senator Mike Enzi, who obviously just retired, but he only was really able to vote against that last defense budget as kind of a protest vote as he was on his way out the door of his kind of final defense budget vote of his career. But usually you see about 6 senators voting against it. And they're usually a couple of the libertarian Republicans. They're usually Rand Paul, Mike Lee, and then on the other side, usually have someone like Murphy in Oregon, usually have maybe Angus King, Kirsten Gillibrand, and Wyden, and those are usually fluctuates between about 5 and 7 votes against.
But doesn't this again, and I'm of the mindset of the people who are in there are representatives. I like to believe doing what we want them to do. And I think on military, I think as a country,
this is a place where you and I could have a little difference of opinion if we wanted to, Rick.
A little bit.
I'll let you continue.
And again, I'm not.
Yeah.
I don't live in fantasy island land, but I believe that we as a people, because you ask everyday people on the street, should we be cutting military spending? And you're going to find very few people who are going to say absolutely we need to be cutting this stuff. There are some. But the majority of the country, it's not their issue. They want to be strong on defense, and any cuts looks like you're weak, and I think they see that as a signal from us.
Yeah, well, that might be, obviously how questions and such are. I don't know. See, I look at it that the politicians, people, you know best, Rick. These are people. They're working all day. They got to take care of their kids. They got to stop off and get pet food for their pets. They got to go to the car wash. They got a lot of stuff to worry about. And they send these people here at, 185,000 or whatever the congressional salary is a year to ideally study this stuff day in, day out and make somewhat informed decisions. And my hope would be that some of the folks there, obviously we're being very idealistic here, but that some of them would be kind of acting in what they think would be the best interest of the country, as opposed to being, I don't know. Does it really hurt Rand Paul? People in Kentucky say he's weak on defense because he takes that vote. I don't really think so. I think there's just enormous, if you look at the campaign contributors to a lot of these candidates, defense tractors are some of their biggest campaign contributors. The people who are writing them the checks want a return on their investment. I think that explains it probably more than, Rand Paul's driving around Bowling Green and someone says you're weak on defense. I don't know. I think it's more a lot of the interest groups and pressures within Washington.
You're right there, but it's also that the Democrats are are viewed much more evil than being against defense spending. Because I have friends who live in Kentucky who they put Democrats and communists in the same breath, and how divided we've become, which is why we came to this platform. I didn't want to be in a silo just talking to people who agree with me. I want people who are going to disagree and do it in a somewhat civil way. I mean, look, I understand you're going to get heated occasionally, but this idea that we got to push this out in the alleyway and go to blows and roll around in the dirt, I don't think that's the right way either.
Yeah, obviously, it's not a perfect, argument to make, just like when people say, the Democrats are the party of Jim Crow or whatever, which is a pretty unfair argument. But I would just say to anyone who says that the Democrats are weak on military, obviously a lot of, the Obama administration, very extensive drone war program, plenty of conflicts have happened under Democratic presidents from Vietnam escalation on down. So I think any characterization of obviously the Bush years, the Iraq situation was kind of maybe cemented that for a lot of people. A war that I think was a very, very bad idea. But, I think that both parties have sent a lot of troops into harm's way, and that's a very bipartisan thing.
Yeah, I still want to get to the bottom of all of the information that was given that got us into Iraq. And I have a friend who's a former congressman who, to this day regrets his vote and wants to talk about what he saw and what was presented to him, but he can't, under, going back to prison. It's not going to come out until we, at some point, have an investigation, and that's probably never going to happen.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of things that give me and other people pause, I think, are very kind of part and parcel of both parties. And I've talked about this a lot at ThinnkSpot with the Independent Institute about concerns about whistleblowers like Edward Snowden and a lot of these other people. And it's one of those issues where you'll see Hillary Clinton, Mitch McConnell, Joe Manchin, all of them in agreement that someone like Snowden or Assange is an extremely problematic person. So I think there is a lot more agreement on certain issues than maybe is presented in the media or in the common imagination.
Yeah, well, I would argue the things that affect our lives daily are the things that they disagree on a little bit. Like the fact that we have, and I want to go back to the Amazon thing here for a second, because how we've been torn into these camps is, for me, for instance, I'm a working class liberal. I'm not necessarily a Democrat. I wish the Democratic Party were a little bit further to the left and doing more for social issues than they're doing. And look, I'm not unhappy with Biden at this moment, but we've been given two alternatives. Just one's less bad than the other, and that's a consequence of the two-party system that we have.
Would you support an alternative to the two-party system? Would you like to see a multi-party system?
There's no way to have a third party. You could never. I don't think you could have a functional government when you have someone who has 34% of support to run the country. When from the day one, 2/3 of the country is against you. I don't know that would work in this system.
But you'd be open to it in theory.
Yeah, I'm open to it in theory. Look, I've had people say we need to have a labor party. We need to have a working. I have a friend who started the Working Families Party. I'm all in favor of that. I'm all in favor and pushing for the frontline issues for average, everyday working people, because my issues may not align with yours, and they certainly don't align with Jeff Bezos and corporate CEOs. And I think too often, and the reason that I do what I do specifically in the way that I do it, is that I focus solely on the person who gets their hands dirty, they punches a clock, and at the end of the week their paycheck doesn't go as far as it did last week. Their needs are not being met by this government and haven't been for a very long time, and they've been allowed to suffer. And this is where I wish people would get a little more angry at the right things. Instead of who's going to what bathroom or who's marrying who, or I could care less about those things. I'm worried about, the veteran on the street who's homeless. I'm worried about the kid who's going to bed hungry. I'm worried about the person working at Amazon who's busting their behind and having a thing on their wrist beeping at them 24 every day that they're on the job. I'm worried about that stuff.
Well, I would say that it's not an accident that we're asked to focus on transgender bathrooms and such. And, I've worked very closely with Governor McCrory, who was the one who signed the bathroom bill in North Carolina at the time. And, if you ask someone like him, he would say, well, it's not an accident that the issues are these kind of wedge issues that only affect a small number of people. They're trying to take all of the anger that would come from the so-called activist class about various business practices that the companies are engaging in, maybe, Apple's, how they're treating workers in East Asia, but because they're getting everyone to focus on, transgender bathrooms, it's kind of taking all the oxygen that would go towards saying, you're making all these billions and billions of dollars. Even back in 2011, you were worth more than the GDP of Poland, and this is how you're treating people in your various plants. And I would say it's not an accident that they're virtue signaling till as the day is long, because you're kind of, in a way, buying off the anger of the would-be activist class by getting them to focus on things that, in my view, are not the most important issues, and issues that really don't have that much to do with the corporation. Why are some of these companies so intent on virtue signaling about some of these various kind of social questions? Well, I would say it's because they don't want people looking at other things that they're doing, most likely.
No, I'm right there with you. And this is where, like Thomas Frank's book, What's the Matter with Kansas, is a perfect example. People are voting against their own best economic interests because they've been fed all of this other stuff. all
My
of
former
this.
professor at Yale, Walter Shapiro, spoofed that, and he said, "What's wrong with the Upper East Side? All these people voting against their financial interests."
I didn't read that, so I don't have his argument. Do share.
Well, I guess he's saying, insofar as people are saying, well, why are you voting against what might be against your economic issues in Kansas? You're saying, well, why is a wealthy person in Manhattan voting for someone who's promising to, increase the estate tax, increase the capital gains tax, right? So there, but this is the thing. I remember when I interviewed Howard Dean came to see me in Philadelphia a couple of years ago, and I asked him. It was around the time of the Democratic primaries, and I said, Governor, what candidate do you like? Which issues do you think would be the winning issues? And he said, I'll answer your question, but I'll say one thing first. People think they vote on policies, but they don't. They just vote based on whether or not they like you, and then they justify it post hoc based on the policy. And I think very, very oftentimes people aren't voting so much on these issues. So we talk about, we were talking about this the other day about, you say, well, Obama was maybe not as good for unions as other people, but people aren't really voting based on often dollars and cents, and that's what we're getting at with what's wrong with the Upper East Side. They're voting because they don't like that someone kneeled for the flag, or they think the guy's obnoxious, or they don't like that he tweets, or they think that he's duplicitous, or they think that, and sometimes it's real things that they've done. They don't like something he did to women, and often people aren't voting as much for dollars and cents. I remember one of our writers, we had a meeting, and he, well-to-do guy, and he said, I voted for Brexit even though it would hurt me because some things are more important than money.
Yeah, I have a friend who's a fairly wealthy person who lives, I think, on the upper end of Manhattan, who said that he votes the way he does because he doesn't want to end up like Brazil, having to worry about if his kids are going to be kidnapped and he's going to have to pay ransom.
Well, that seems like a more legitimate concern. That's not symbolic. If you're actually concerned about crime or law and order, and you think that one candidate's much better, and if you look at what's happening in cities like Philadelphia and other places right now, it is, we're back at 2007, 2006 homicide levels this year.
Lots of problems on the horizon, and do you see things getting better? I mean, we're in these polar positions. Do you see an opportunity of moving forward and actually getting things done? I'm looking at the infrastructure bill, which I'm a big supporter of and have been for a very long time. I'm of the mindset when people are back to work, when their lives are going well, they're making money, they can put food on the table, clothes on the kids' back, I can save for retirement, all that stuff. People get a lot less angry. But do you see a path forward?
So about this time last year, I spent a lot of time with Joshua Fogg-Dienstag's book on pessimism, and it's about philosophical pessimism. And he draws a distinction in that book between, there are a lot of people who are philosophical optimists who think, everything's going to be great, like John Stuart Mill, but are really miserable in their day-to-day life. And then there are people maybe like Chekhov or whatever, with kind of a tragic worldview, but they're actually pretty cheerful in their day-to-day life. And I'm part of the latter camp. So despite, being relatively cheerful day to day, I, generally believe, generally not saying that things always go poorly, but generally brace for them. So, I systems, especially things that humans create, are very, very fragile and really subject to decay and problems. And, disorder is the natural state, not order. So order is kind of pretty rare and not often come by. So no, I don't know, but I'm not sitting with rosy glasses saying, oh, things will, necessarily or probably get better. Things can absolutely get better, and great things can be done, but they're going to require a lot of work, and that's kind of not the natural state of things being good. The natural state is things being
so
disordered.
you buy in the arc of progress, or the arc of progress is long, and the arc of history is long, and it bends towards progress. We buying any of that?
Well, I guess I would
fix it.
Not necessarily. I generally subscribe to a linear view of time. The time is moving in one direction as opposed to a cyclical view, like Rome fell, America fell. Is not that view, not a cyclical view. But no, I don't think it's inevitable. I think the trap is that things have gotten so much better in the past, number of decades. If you look at poverty rates, long life expectancy, they have. And the trap is to think that that's some sort of natural or inevitable thing. And it's anything but. It's a result of a lot of things going well. And I would say that the so-called liberal world order is definitely a luxury and not something to be taken for granted. And just as easily as all this stuff can be created, it can be destroyed.
No, good point. So the last line of questioning, because we're about ready to wrap things up, and I appreciate it.
This has been a nice chat, Rick. I feel like I've been doing too much of the talking, though.
No, that you're the guest here.
Okay.
We're here to have a little bit of back and forth, but I'm
Right.
interested in what you've got to say, and I'm sure other people are as well. The
Thank you,
Biden
Rick.
administration, I guess we haven't hit 100 days yet. So far, do you good job, bad job? Where do you put these first days?
Well, I'm extremely concerned about a lot of the lack of respect for sort of institutional norms, like the announcement about the court packing today, the Biden administration coming out and saying that they're not supportive of the legislative filibuster anymore, looking to modify that and turn it to a kind of a talking filibuster. The number of executive orders implemented, kind of a lack of concern for the ability for states to kind of make their own policy, to have it superseded by federal legislation. So I'm a little amazed that after all these years about complaining about how President Trump was such a unique threat to norms and our constitutional order, to have somebody kind of come in and basically try to say none of that matters anymore. But most of all, and what I wrote a column about, is I've been extremely concerned most proximately about the overt politicization of the military, about having people kind of in uniform, including and also the press secretary at the Pentagon, John Kirby, to kind of come out and openly condemn American citizens, journalists, and also the marching of Guam National Guard's troops to the office of Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. And I think the overt politicization of the military, which we've seen in the early days of the Biden administration, is one of the most concerning things I've ever seen since I've been following American politics.
Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree with that. I'm on the filibuster front. I'm in favor of returning to a talking filibuster. Mr. Smith goes to Washington. If it's that important that we have to stop it, I want to hear Ted Cruz on the floor of the Senate tell me why we can't pass whatever it is, the PRO Act, an infrastructure bill. Do your job. If it's that important that it can't go forward and we can't vote on it. Because sadly, for my entire life, the Senate has been where all progress has gone to die. And I hear the same thing from my ultra conservative friends as well. So I'm in favor of returning to a talking filibuster. If you want to hold the floor, hold the floor.
What do you make of the fact that people like Barack Obama, Joe Biden, and such, when they were in the Senate, and as recently as when the Republicans had control, people like Dick Durbin excoriated any talk about getting rid of the filibuster as recently as 3 years ago?
I disagreed with them then. I'm.
So you would have been okay with the Republicans when they had full control of the government, ramming through all the stuff, federal laws against abortion, maybe make, radically change, maybe tax
Elections
policies.
have consequences, Eric. This is why.
Okay, so you would have been okay with that.
I wouldn't have been okay with it. I'd have been pissed to no end. But this is why you vote. This is why. Look, it's you had brought up, and we're going to go a couple minutes over. Yeah. But you'd thrown up at something to talk about today, like the minimum wage.
Right.
I'm someone.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about.
No,
that,
I'm someone
maybe another time.
I'm someone who's not so big on we have to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. In fact, there was a time, and I still kind of believe that things have to get bad enough before people say enough of this crap, and we start seeing the old school organizing of people saying we're not going to take it anymore and getting organized and fighting back. For me, democracy is not a spectator sport. Elections have consequences. You didn't show up, something bad can happen. And then we've become way too complacent on, well, things are going to be the way they are. Look, if when Donald Trump gets in there and we move towards some really ugly stuff, then you've got to organize to undo it. And this is where I've always been.
That's not that dissimilar from Slavoj Žižek's argument why he, as a real lefty, wanted Trump, because he said, we want to kind of tear the whole system down and start over. And,
yeah, I didn't go there.
Yeah. So one of our writers, I don't know the extent to which, I think it's easy to say some of the stuff in the abstract, but then they get to the ballot box and they end up going with Biden. But that was his position until, not long before. And he says, I'm going with the guy who wrote the crime bill, who's, done all this stuff on bankruptcy issues and whipped the votes on the Senate side for the Iraq war. Like, I'm going to hold out for, a real Bernie Sanders style people. But I guess in the end, he did go with Biden. But, obviously there was, I don't know what, between 8 and 13% of Bernie Sanders primary voters went for Trump. But a lot of people, there's actually some overlap. I know Bernie really denies this, but there's actually a lot of overlap historically between Bernie and Trump's positions on trade, on the border, and on military interventionism.
You'll never get any argument out of it. No argument.
There's a lot of overlap there.
No, there's no argument. Trump stole the right stuff. The labor movement had talking about the bad trade deals for decades. The labor movement had talking about the deindustrialization of small communities across this country and the horrible effects of opioid addiction because we took jobs from them and gave them drugs. No, that was not, I don't think Trump was out there figuring that out. He stole the right stuff.
But the unfortunate thing, I guess, under Trump is we did actually see in 2018, 2019, a lot of manufacturing job growth, but it was mostly hitting states like Nevada and a lot of the western states. And it wasn't really actually hitting the states where the campaign was focused at the time in places like Michigan and Ohio and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. There was a lot of that industrial job growth, but was really focused a lot in western states.
And then the pandemic, it all got wiped out. And we're
pandemic
still,
is
I think we're
still
600,000, 515,000 manufacturing jobs down from the height.
Yeah, I don't know the number off the top of my head, but definitely some lost jobs there, obviously.
Yeah, but interesting discussion. I appreciate you taking time.
Rick, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you for inviting me, and I'm glad we got to talk about a lot of these issues.
Good stuff, Eric. I appreciate the time. Good talking with you, man.
Likewise. Take care.
Most certainly we'll have to do this again. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Was it productive? Was something worth doing in the future? Anything I said got under your skin, got on your mind? I'd love to hear it. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. We're going to wrap things up. I appreciate you taking time. Thanks so much for being here. We'll see you back here next time.